Welcome to Move Your Mind. My name's Nick Bracks, and this is a podcast where we have real conversations with real people and give real advice. COVID was a difficult time for all of us, but this next guest had a first-hand experience with hotel quarantine. He talks about what it was like to be on the ground from day one and staying on the ground until earlier this year. Max Hacker is a naturopath and mental health nurse who's worked in the natural health industry since the year 2000. He specialises in stress management, detoxification, anti-aging, men's health, holistic fitness training, and injury recovery. It was great catching up and learning about his story and recent experiences, and I'm sure you'll all get something out of this. Thanks again for supporting the podcast. If you'd like to learn more, you can purchase the Move Your Mind book at nickbracks.com/book, or you can join the Move Your Mind community at moveyourmind.me. Max, I'm glad that we finally got here. I think this might be a record for the most times that I've had to change a podcast interview. And there's been a few. There's been some where it took 2 years to get a guest on there, but it's been mainly my fault. And I think just the coordinating the times between countries and our schedules, and the time differences not aligning with the schedules. So I'm glad that we made it. We're here and we're about to, record this episode.
Amazing, mate. It's great to be here.
Appreciate you making the time.
Thanks.
So, would you mind giving a bit of just so our guests here to, before we go into it, to give a bit of a background on yourself and what you do now and how you came to doing what you do?
Yeah, thanks. So my background is that I've worked in the healthcare field in terms of both being in the natural and alternative medicine field as a naturopath and holistic nutritionist. I also studied nursing and became a mental health nurse. I found mental health nursing really interesting when I was at uni. The symptoms of mental health and the presentations of people when they're suffering from a variety of mental health issues. I found that super fascinating as a student. So then my pathway working as a nurse became into the mental health stream rather than the medical stream of nursing. And so I've worked as both a naturopath, a nutritionist, and as a mental health nurse now since, as a nurse for 12 years, as a naturopath for over 20 years. And it's, I love both fields. I love the idea in natural health where we look a lot at underlying factors in a person's health, and in terms of symptoms of disease, what are the underlying causes? Really passionate about that, whether it's nutrient deficiencies or some factors in a person's diet or lifestyle that are causing them to be sick. And I love mental health nursing as well. I've done a lot of different areas of mental health nursing. I've done acute mental health of people who are acutely unstable in terms of their mental well-being, schizophrenia, bipolar, people who might be brought from the streets, say they're having a psychotic episode, brought to the acute mental health ward. They might be brought in by police or ambulance, and we'd be looking after them in the acute ward. And that was my first role as a mental health nurse, so I learned a lot. It was extremely challenging, and I took that on as really at the time, it was so almost overwhelming in terms of how challenging it is. I had to take it on as a personal development challenge. I had to say, I've got a 6-month rotation in this ward, and I have to take this on as I can get through this and know myself to be someone who can achieve something like this rather than running the other way, right? Because that is the thought that goes through your mind, I guess, or went through my mind when you're faced with an environment that's so stressful and, so many factors that are going on in your own mind about, do I really want to do this? And then, you push through and then get out the other side and come through and have skills that are then applied in other areas as well. I worked in aged care mental health after that, so psychogeriatrics, which is a great field as well. And drug and alcohol rehab is one of my main areas that I worked in as a nurse as well, which is also an amazing area. One of my most the things I'm most interested in is is hearing people's journeys through drug and alcohol rehab, is what led them to where they are now, in terms of being in a detox clinic and everything that led them to that, being in that place, in that clinic, talking to me as the nurse, right? And people have very different paths that led them there. lots of different paths. So I found that really interesting. Then in 2020 was really quite an interesting thing for me. I, with lockdowns and setting up to do my work from home, I do a lot of lecturing at universities in both mental health and also in nutrition and naturopathy. So I sort of set up my home office, planning to work from home. Suddenly these texts come through from a nursing agency that said hotel quarantine work. I thought, wow, this sounds amazing. So turns out that work was on site in the hotels. At first I thought, this sounds like it's telehealth. It sounds like I might be doing this from home, right? Which is unheard of for nursing, to be doing nursing remotely. Yeah. But it turns out we did go to the hotel physically because we had to be there to kind of be on site, be part of the team. There'd be a medical team, there'd be doctors, medical nurses who looked after the COVID side of things with swabbing and monitoring symptoms of patients coming back from overseas. And then there'd be initially not even a mental health team, there'd be just me as a mental health nurse. Eventually that grew into a team. They over a couple of months, they would have psychologists as well and that sort of thing that were there. There would be there'd be different departments like social workers, and also the Department of Communities and Justice were providing emergency services for people. Some people who they were returning due to COVID, they were returning to Australia after not having lived here for 20 years or whatever, and didn't really have an address here, and they needed some help, I guess, some of those people, so all those services. So I turned up at one of the hotels in Sydney, and it was one of the most interesting experiences of my life. It was absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I was thinking I almost should be taking notes here of everything that's happening, because it's amazing to hear these conversations about all these emergency responses to suddenly people being taken from a cruise ship and being put up in the Novotel or the whichever other hotels, and they were I'd be turning up, and then the other nurses would say, "Hey Max, look, here's your list of people who require acute mental health support. Could you please give them a call?" So it was via telehealth, which was great. We would just use the hotel phone lines, and so from a COVID point of view, we were really protected. And I did have to, on an occasion, go to patient's room, but only knocking on the door, never going inside. But you'd be gowning up in the full PPE and all the rest of it. But it would, most of the time, it'd actually be a welfare check with the police, where I'd be calling the guest in their room, they're not answering, and then we'd be I'd call the police that were on site as well, say, "Hey, this person's not answering, can we do a welfare check?" So we'd go up together, knock on the door, and every time with me, which was always good, they were always there and they were fine. There was just a reason that they didn't answer their phone, like they had it turned down too much, or they were on their own mobile or something like that. Or they were working. Some people were working. And we wouldn't go and do the door knock straight away. We'd always give it a couple of hours and call several times before that. Otherwise, it'd be shocking. Maybe of course, give people a shock. But that was one of the reasons why we had to be on site physically, is so we could liaise with the different teams and also be there in case we needed to be. So that was the journey into a hotel quarantine. And I've got to say, well, I did it from the first week that it started until almost the very end. It was like basically just over a week. In that final week it ran, I couldn't do the shift, but until that point I was doing a shift all the way through. And it ran until April this year, right? So it ran for 2 full years. And honestly, like every time I was on a shift, they'd give us usually in most hotels, they'd give us our own room, right? Just give us one of what's normally a hotel room for visitors. We'd be set up in there, and I'd get my own room and set up on the phone lines and all that. Sometimes we'd use boardrooms that were set up as call centers. But most hotels, and there was probably 25 or so hotels that I went to here in Sydney in CBD and also at the airport. Mostly get your own room, and I'm just like, wow, this is my workplace. This 5-star hotel room, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So basically every single shift, I would always literally think, wow, this is an amazing job, because I know it's going to end. I really appreciated it.
Yeah. And did you get burnt out from it for doing it for that long? Like, I mean, it's a long time. Like, it's hard to get your head around. And I mean, even when I think back now, I mean, it's so weird because COVID, I guess I was sort of in Australia for the first 11 months and I was back in the US, and things sort of opened up, a bit earlier over here than in Australia, but it just seems almost like a distant memory to me now. But you forget how long this went for, and probably doesn't feel that distant to you, with your experience.
Yeah, fair point. And it probably went over a bit longer than it had to be honest. It didn't really
Right.
need to go to April 2022 is how I felt personally. It's how a lot of nurses felt as
It's a
well.
long
We're all
time.
wondering. We already had COVID, we had lockdowns ending, and it was on, we had people being quarantined when there was probably more COVID in the Australian community
Yeah.
and in possibly where they were coming from, possibly. So yeah, so there was that factor. But I did actually get burnt out. At one point, about 6 months in, I actually got pneumonia from being so burnt out. It wasn't a COVID pneumonia though, because I've been tested so many times, but I was really sick for several weeks. And yeah, that is actually what
That's
happened
tough. Yeah.
at that point. So I had to take a good 3 weeks off. And yeah, it took me a while to get my breath back, quite literally. And so yeah, that's true. I got a bit burnt out, a bit stressed. But as a mental health nurse myself, I'm a person who likes to find, one of the big things that the role of a mental health nurse in any setting, whether that's in a hospital or in hotel quarantine, is our role is we're like the gatekeeper to the services that a person needs. So we find the resources and the support that a person needs, as well as giving the support ourselves that's within our skill set. So we find these, refer to a psychologist or refer to a doctor or whatever it is that the person needs, right? And so for myself as well, when I was stressed, I'd be finding my own services as well, in terms of, well, often it's literally debriefing. Sometimes these things can be informal, debriefing with a colleague who's also in the similar position, who you can have a good chat to and hear them literally say word for word what I would be saying.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, I can't believe, we're having basically the exact same experiences and, stuff like that. That's what I was doing more as I got to know more nurses.
Yeah, well, you're only human, it's like, and that's the thing, isn't it? Doing that kind of work, I think a lot of people probably forget that the people doing that work need to, be taking care of themselves and need the support as well, because you're taking on so much. And I mean, I experienced that at a point when I was doing, I think there was a year, I'm not doing anywhere near as many now, but there was a year where I did about 150 talks. And, a lot of them, I'm having to share my own story. And really, you sort of, it's very raw. And I just, I got to a point where I was like, I actually have to pull back, because this is affecting my mental health. I'm not coping with that extent of it, so I think it's really important in the work you're doing, that you guys are supported as well. And, that's really, talked about, because that can sometimes get pushed to a second priority.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it's an appreciated point in general through healthcare, is providing that support for the actual people who are the healthcare workers.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Did COVID for you? I mean, I guess in mental health in general, one positive that came out is it became more talked about, because so many people were suffering. Not that that's a good thing, but at least there was some positive that came out of it. For you, did it show you that even more, I guess, everyday people that we wouldn't think normally would have mental health issues or could suffer in that way? Did it elevate that actually more people are susceptible than we would think in everyday life, or than people show, I guess, is probably what I'm asking.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it did, right? And so people, a variety of people would say things like they've got more access to taking a sick day in terms of their work, because they can talk to their boss about saying they need a mental health day, basically. And I was just speaking with someone just recently that talking about how taking a mental health day at work doesn't always have to. It can just be stress, for example. It doesn't have to be a diagnosed mental health condition, like anxiety or depression or schizophrenia, or you name it. It can sometimes be, look, the stress is just overwhelming right now. I'd really benefit from a day off for my physical and mental health. So that's part of that higher awareness that people that I've seen can take a bit more leeway with that, which is obviously a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for supporting Move Your Mind. We're expanding the offerings of the organization, and we're tailoring everything we do to suit you guys and to try and answer to all of your needs and the questions that you send in. The book is available globally. You can find all of the links at nickbracks.com/book. And we've just released the Move Your Mind community. We've currently got a men's community group, a women's community group, a general group. We're going to be loading up other groups, and you can find all of the links at moveyourmind.me. This group's been created based on the needs of what we've heard and learnt throughout running Move Your Mind. And we have live events, we've got courses, we've got huge amounts of value, the ability to share information, share ideas, work in groups together to grow and share your learnings, to learn about different topics. You get email reminders. There's a whole lot of features in there. We're constantly updating it, and we're so excited to share it with you. You can find all of the information about it at moveyourmind.me. So in the work that you're doing, are there what are some of the most common mental health issues that you're seeing? I mean, for example, I guess stress and anxiety are, are such a big problem in the world now. Are there sort of themes and general things that you're seeing in society through the work that you're doing as being, an issue that's affecting, a large portion of us?
Sure. Yeah, exactly. So stress, anxiety, wouldn't have specifically changed in terms of the full-on diagnosed medical conditions or mental health conditions, I should say, like the schizophrenia, bipolar, or other mental health conditions like that. But the change would probably be in that area of stress and anxiety, maybe depression, that I still see now. During COVID, it was really interesting when people were in their 2 weeks of isolation, and it was 2 weeks of isolation in the hotels for most of the time. Right at the end, the last couple of months became 1 week, and then it'd be interesting sort of variety of challenges that people faced within the mental health context. One was where a person would say something, especially initially when people were coming back off the cruise ships, they would say, "Hey, this person's been suffering from depression their whole life. They were finally better to the point where they could go on a cruise, the trip of a lifetime, and then they had to come back, and then not only come back and the holiday ended in drastic circumstances, but they had to then do 2 weeks of isolation, and that just made their mental health really decline, and they went downhill." So our role as nurses in those cases, or in all cases, but especially in those ones, was to make sure that people stayed safe in their rooms, that there wasn't some tragedy in terms of anyone doing anything too serious to themselves. So that was really to steer the ship through for them, and then get them out, and then get back on track, hopefully, with their lives. So those sort of situations where people were, already suffering with a mental health condition. There'd be interestingly the sort of situations where someone would call me up, because people could call up as well as being referred to me as the mental health nurse in quarantine. And they would say, "Hey, look, I've been working in my room. I've got a job, but look, I'm really struggling. I thought I'd be fine. I thought I'd just relax here and cruise through. But look, I'm really struggling. I'm getting panic attacks. I'm feeling claustrophobic. I can't open the window because they don't open, and things like that." And then they'd be like, that's kind of the opposite end of where the person's normally high functioning and normally pretty well, and suddenly they're really struggling, right? So again, that's where I'd be providing a lot of different support and working with that person in what kind of support it is that works best for them, whether it's meditation, deep breathing, visualization. A lot of these things are best done in a guided way, through an app or through YouTube videos, something that guides you to do it, because it's pretty hard to just suddenly do that
once you're in that situation. But actually, do you feel like, in kind of a messed up way, that someone being thrown into a situation like that where you have no control and all vices, external things are pulled away, so you're having to actually confront being alone with yourself and your thoughts, and then finding techniques to cope with that? Do you think in some ways that can be positive as well? Because I think there's so many people I feel like, and I meet so many people like this, and I've been like this myself, where they're saying, oh, life's amazing, and I'm never had a mental health problem, etc. But then you look at their behavior, and they're drinking every second night, they're taking drugs, they're workaholics, they can't be still for more than 5 seconds. It's like, well, from the outside looking at that, you're probably not that well. You're using external things as a clutch to actually cope, because I think most of us, and it's a symptom of the world we live in as well, with instant gratification, technology, social media, people can't just be still and do nothing. Do you think that sort of helped to bring that to light for a lot of people?
It's true. Yeah, look, it's a good point. And actually, in some cases, I tried to make that point to people.
Yeah.
And I didn't do it to everyone, because sometimes that might, I
they
said
might
to
not
some people,
want to hear it at that point,
exactly, that's right. They
might not be ready. Yeah.
Yes. And they might say, well, it's easy for you to say, or something like that, right?
Exactly.
And so what I did, when I had a better rapport and a better connection to the person through probably days of talking to them, like a few days in a row or whatever, I'd sometimes try and see if they could reframe the hotel quarantine into an opportunity, rather than, or at least there's a component that's an opportunity there for them to do things that they don't normally get to do, like just read a book or catch up on life admin and get into those sort of habits, like the mindfulness or things like that.
Have some
maybe
time.
or do a yoga class off YouTube every day, even a couple of times a day, create that structure. And so I know for myself that there's lots of things like that I'd like to do that I don't get the time to.
Well, I loved it. I mean, I had been living in Vancouver at the time. I came back to Australia for the first 11 months, and I was in lockdown, and I actually really enjoyed that period, because it was this 11 months of, okay, the decision's been made for me. I can't, I'm restricted in all these things I can do. So it cut out half of the things I was doing for work. So I was like, okay, great. I've got all this time now to focus and work on myself. I launched this podcast. I signed a book publishing deal, wrote a book, did all these things I wanted to do, and came out of it actually being in a better position and, feeling better and doing more work on myself. So, I think it can be such a positive as well to, have this time to just stop, because I really do think the biggest problem in the world we live in now is just this inability to be present and to, put focused attention on one thing at a time. And devices, we're needing to be stimulated nonstop. It's just, our brain is not meant to work like that.
Yeah, definitely. 100%.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Did you fly back into Sydney or?
Melbourne.
Oh, into Melbourne.
Yeah.
Nice one.
So I was pretty lucky, because I was living overseas. I came back and stayed with my mum and dad, and they've got an enormous place, and got to just have a lot of space there to sort of do things at the beginning of it, and then I was elsewhere.
Okay, right. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so you're right, and this is such an important thing. So sometimes this issue comes up in sort of everyday life, where we don't have enough time for each other. And I think that's something we should all be aware of. We need to have time for each other, just to be together, not always rushing off and doing a million things, and let alone all the stuff online and all the rest of it. I think it's obvious. It's such an obvious talking point, and it's one that we have to work towards strongly, because it's obviously only getting worse, the amount of time we're spending on our phones and all the rest of it. Yeah, it's a big one. Yeah.
It's not going to change either. It's not going to, I think none of that's going to change unless each individual, makes that choice themselves to make the changes, because, maybe in the future, but at the moment it's only getting worse. We're only sort of getting more consumed by these things, and they're becoming more addictive and whatever else. So yeah, I guess we've got one more question before I go into these final questions. But I think you were talking earlier about when you're really interested in learning the stories of these people that are recovering drug addicts, alcoholics, etc. I think that's a really interesting thing that we're not educated enough on. And I remember when I was living in Vancouver, I was living near one of the main streets where it's one of the worst homeless problems in one of the Western world. I'm forgetting the name of the street. I don't know why I've gone blank on it, but it's it's basically a huge stretch like Skid Row in the US. And I was living next to it. So I'd walk to the gym every day and walk past, seeing people literally passed out with needles in their arms, and this congregation of people that are homeless drug addicts, and there's nowhere else for them to go. And because it's cold in other parts of Canada, they're all congregating there. And it's just become a spot they go to. And I would just walk past and look at them. And, every day I'd really think about it, and I'd get a little bit emotional, because I'd be thinking, you know what, these people I'm sure they have, this huge backstory of how they got here. And myself or anyone else, if one or two things happened in our lives, we could be there as well. And we're not taught in society, we're not educated on this, and we're not taught to actually understand that and know that these are humans. These people have real stories, and they're no more flawed than us. They might have just had worse, luck, and worse things happen. And I think it's really important. And, because I think the common thing is we judge, we get taught to judge it and just say, oh, well, don't end up like that. It's like, well, hang on. No one wants to end up like that. So what actually happened? Is that what you've experienced from, hearing some of those stories?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, exactly. So I've seen it in, acute mental health wards where people would be, have their family and children and wife, and for some reason their mental health unraveled and they became homeless. And then their mental health got so bad that they became, they weren't coping and they became hospitalized.
Yeah.
You go back in their timeline. If you go back 10 years, they were probably living in the family home, right?
Yeah.
And they were coping. And it's a really interesting point. I've seen this, where I've just thought, wow, this is exactly on the point you made. That just a normal person who, for some reason, a couple of factors, possibly a combination of a few factors, maybe genetics is a component, or could also just be literally factors, things that have happened in their life that have made them decline in their mental health. And I'm a big fan of the role of nutrition for mental health. I think that in Western medicine in general, we don't have our eye on the ball in terms of nutrients that are so important for mental health. A lot of people are deficient in vitamin D. A lot of people are maybe not completely deficient, but they're low in, say, B12 and other B vitamins that are really important for things like the synthesis of our neurotransmitters, brain chemicals like serotonin and other neurotransmitters. And if you're deficient in that nutrient, the body's physically struggling, and then that translates into symptoms of mental health. But it actually comes from a physical cause in some cases as well, as probably one factor amongst a few, like I was saying. So the nutritional side of it, I think, well, that's my main area of interest as a nutritionist, is that because we can do a lot there.
It's a 10-year anniversary of Bracks, and we've relaunched with the classic white pair. We've also got new styles coming out super soon. We're donating $1 from every pair to mental health, currently to 1 in 5. You can find all of this at www.underbracks.com. It's huge, we're not educated on. It's been an area I'm not from I didn't study in this area. I've been more an advocate and sharing stories and, working with different psychologists and experts. And for me, it's been about, habits, fitness, routines, getting professional help. I'm also a big believer in people that, some people need medication as well. That's another thing. But I think nutrition, it's only just become more recent that people are understanding, like you're saying, how, critical this is for our mental well-being, that we eat the right foods and look into that. So I think, it's a really important topic for people to explore.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So we finish every episode with 5 closing questions. Nothing too crazy. These can just be, short answers, whatever comes to mind for you. So the first one is, what's your best childhood memory?
It's a good one. Probably, let me think. There's a few, obviously, like as a child.
One of the best, yeah.
Being able to go to football games as a child when my parents took me, that was one of the best, because I grew up watching rugby league and loved going to the games when I could. I grew up in the Byron area, so in the north coast of New South Wales. I was born in Germany, so we came to Australia when I was 7, and then moved to the north coast. So there's nothing going on there, especially in the late 80s and 90s. And not a lot going on in terms of any sort of activities for kids typically, like apart from local things. So something like a big football game, that was one of my big memories. We stayed back and we got to meet the players. My mum wasn't so happy because we got out hours late. But she we got some signatures and that sort of thing. So that's one of my big memories. I also remember arriving in Australia actually as a 7-year-old. I remember I was really already as a child into gardening, growing things in Germany like sunflowers and things like that. And then I remember arriving at the airport as a 7-year-old and seeing all these trees that I'd never seen before, which were gum trees. And I literally remember that first moment. So although it's not a great memory, it's a big milestone as such in that moment.
Yeah, I love that. No, that's great. Thank you for sharing. What do you think is one of the biggest burdens on mental health in society at the moment?
Look, I'm going to give you maybe not the textbook answer, but rather what my observations are. And I think one of the biggest burdens actually is, and is also an area of opportunity, is for people to help each other more. That's to me is one of the big ones because it's one of those more subtle ones in terms of, unfortunately, and this can be a factor that makes a person's mental health decline, is that maybe someone else is through their own challenges maybe being not as supportive as they could be. And that's not to say that's a blame game or that's their fault, but I think one of the big things in mental health is that we support each other more and we're more aware of that as a society and as every individual.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
No, I think that's a really, really good point. Yeah, makes total sense. What's your personal definition of happiness?
Good question. Well, first thing comes to mind, I don't mind going and getting a coffee and sitting down having a nice coffee. That usually makes me pretty happy. Going to a local coffee shop. Spending time with the kids, 100%. I've got a 3 and a 5-year-old. And often at the end of the weekend on a Sunday night, it's all over already. The weekend goes so quick, and I haven't had the chance. Well, we spent all weekend together, and it's been pretty stressful and tiring. And I'm like, no, tomorrow I'm not spending the day with you because you're at daycare and I'm at work. So spending good time with each other, and snuggling and sitting together, and reading a book or whatever it is. That's definitely a big one.
The simple things, isn't it? It's the best. So 2 more. What are you most afraid of?
Well, I'd say one of the things as a naturopath and nutritionist, one of the things I'm afraid of is the health of the planet, the health of the oceans in terms of what's being dumped in them, things like the plastics that are just floating around everywhere, contamination in terms of our food supply. And although that's something we don't want to go overboard on in terms of overthinking it, I'm concerned around the health of planet, how they're finding toxins from industries that go up into the atmosphere and they travel through the clouds and they go into the highest mountains when it snows there. So it's going everywhere. So that's probably in a broad sense one of the things that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, very valid point, mate. So final one, a more positive one to end on. What are you most proud of?
Well, I'd say someone asked me this recently, what's my greatest career achievement? And that was actually working in hotel quarantine. That was something that I think back to now, and it sounds almost a bit cliched, but it was an amazing thing to be part of, and something that I feel so lucky to have been able to be part of such a massive project. So I'm proud of that, and probably just my family as well, and building the home that we have here in Sydney. So that's something that I'm definitely proud of. My wife and 2 kids.
I love that. Well, yeah, Max, I'm so glad we got to do this, and we'll have to do a follow-up one sometime in the future. And great to meet you as well. And thank you for making the time. And appreciate it. I'm sure a lot of people will, really connect with a lot of what you talked about here.
Thank you, mate. Great to talk to you.
You too. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Thanks to Max Hacker for joining me today for Move Your Mind. If you'd like to learn more, you can join the Movie Mind community by going to moviemind.me, or you can purchase the Movie Mind book at nickbracks.com/book.